The day my grandmother's will was read, I expected nothing more than a small check and a polite goodbye. But instead a quiet lawyer slid a rusted iron key across the desk and told me it belonged to an abandoned family mine I had never heard of, and that key would drag me into a past someone had buried so carefully that even my own childhood memories had been rewritten to keep it hidden. If you've ever discovered that the story you believed about your life wasn't the real one, then you'll understand why that moment in the lawyer's office changed everything. The room smelled like old paper, polished wood, and the kind of quiet wealth that had faded over time but never completely disappeared. I recognized that smell from years of sitting in social service offices and courtrooms, but this place had a different atmosphere, heavier somehow, as if every document on the shelves carried a secret. My caseworker, a tired but kind woman named Diane, had told me attending the reading of the will was just a formality. "You're her only living relative," she explained over the phone a week earlier. "Your grandmother passed away 3 days ago. You should be there." The word grandmother had felt strange when she said it. I hadn't seen Margaret Hale since I was 10 years old. In fact, the last memory I had of her was standing in a government building hallway while she spoke quietly to a social worker behind a half-closed door. 10 minutes later, she walked back out, knelt down in front of me, and said she couldn't take care of me anymore. After that, she disappeared from my life like a story that had been erased mid-sentence. So when Diane told me I had inherited something, I assumed it would be small, maybe a few $100s, maybe some paperwork confirming the end of a connection that had already been broken for years. The lawyer's office was quiet except for the ticking of a brass clock on the wall. I sat stiffly in a leather chair that creaked every time I shifted, feeling painfully aware of the cheap suit I was wearing. It had come from a donation closet the day I aged out of the system, and it didn't fit my shoulders properly. My entire life was packed in a duffel bag sitting by my feet. Across the desk sat the attorney handling the estate, a thin, elderly man named Harold Bennett, whose white hair and steady hands made him look like he had been practicing law longer than I had been alive. He opened a folder slowly, reading the document inside, as if every word needed to be weighed before it was spoken aloud. "Daniel Hale," he began, adjusting his glasses, "your grandmother's estate is modest." That word hung in the air for a moment before he continued. After paying outstanding debts, the remaining liquid assets totaled $1,380. He slid a paper across the desk toward me, as if presenting a fragile artifact. I glanced at it briefly, but the number didn't surprise me. Margaret Hale had never seemed wealthy when I knew her. Our house had been small, the furniture old but carefully maintained. She had worked long hours and rarely spent money on anything unnecessary. Still, hearing the final number out loud made the entire inheritance feel strangely final, like a chapter closing on a book I had stopped reading years earlier. I nodded once, ready to stand up and leave, but Mr. Bennett cleared his throat again before I could move. "There is one other item your grandmother left specifically for you," he said. He reached into the desk drawer and removed a large yellow envelope sealed with a dark red wax stamp. The envelope looked older than everything else in the room, its edges worn soft as if it had been handled many times before finally being stored away. My name was written across the front in narrow, slightly shaky handwriting that I immediately recognized, even though I hadn't seen it in 8 years. "Daniel Hale." The sight of it made something tighten quietly in my chest. The lawyer placed the envelope on the desk and pushed it toward me. "Your grandmother gave strict instructions that this be delivered to you only after the will was read and only on your 18th birthday," he said carefully. I picked it up, surprised by its weight. Inside I could feel something hard shifting against folded paper. "What is it?" I asked, my voice sounding unfamiliar in the quiet office. Mr. Bennett leaned back slightly in his chair. "A deed to a small piece of land in the mountains outside a town called Pine Hollow," he explained. "Roughly 5 acres. The county records list it as an abandoned mining claim." A mine. The word felt strange in my mind, like it belonged to someone else's life story rather than mine. "And the key?" I asked. "Presumably the entrance," he replied. I opened the envelope slowly. A rusted iron key slid into my palm, cold and heavy, followed by a folded sheet of thick yellowed paper. When I unfolded it, I saw a hand-drawn map with a red circle marking a ridge deep in the forest. Written beside the circle were a few simple instructions in the same handwriting as the envelope. The entrance is on the eastern face. The key opens the only door. Trust what you find. I looked up from the map, confused. Why would she leave me this? Mr. Bennett studied me for a moment before answering. Your grandmother was a private woman, he said quietly. But she insisted this land was the only thing she still owned that mattered. He paused, then added something that made the room feel suddenly colder. Before she passed, she told me that when the time came, you would understand why. I slipped the key and map back into the envelope, unsure what I was supposed to feel. Curiosity flickered somewhere beneath the confusion, a small stubborn spark that refused to go out. As I stood up to leave, the lawyer spoke again, his voice softer than before. Daniel, he said, if you decide to visit that property, be careful. I turned back toward him. Why? I asked. He hesitated just long enough for the silence to become noticeable. Because, he said slowly, some families don't bury their secrets in graveyards. He glanced down at the envelope in my hand. Sometimes they bury them underground. The next morning I woke up in a cheap roadside motel with a rusted iron key sitting on the nightstand beside the folded map, and the strange thing was I couldn't stop staring at it, because the more I thought about my grandmother leaving me a worthless mining claim in the middle of nowhere, the more it felt like she wanted me to actually go there and see something for myself. If you've ever had the feeling that a single decision might quietly change the direction of your life, then you'll understand why I eventually packed my duffel bag, grabbed the envelope, and caught the first bus heading north toward the mountains. The ride lasted most of the day, long enough for the city skyline to disappear behind farmland and rolling hills before the landscape turned into thick forest stretching endlessly in every direction. I opened the envelope again during the trip and studied the map under the dim bus lights. It wasn't a modern property map like you'd expect from county records. It looked hand-drawn on old parchment, with only a few landmarks sketched along a narrow road that ended at a steep ridge. In the center of the ridge was a red circle with a small X. Next to it were the same instructions written in my grandmother's careful handwriting. Asterisk, the entrance is on the eastern face. The key opens the only door. Trust what you find. Asterisk, the message didn't explain anything, but it made the whole thing feel less like an inheritance and more like a puzzle she wanted me to solve. By the time the bus dropped me off at a quiet crossroads near a town called Pine Hollow, the sky was gray and the air smelled like damp earth and pine needles. The town barely looked real, just a gas station, a diner with a flickering neon sign, and a small general store. I stepped into the store first to buy a flashlight, batteries, and some water before heading toward the property. When I unfolded the map on the counter, the old man running the register leaned forward and squinted at it. Haven't seen that place marked in a long time, he muttered. My stomach tightened. You know it? I asked. He nodded slowly. That's the old Raven Ridge mine, he said. Belonged to a woman named Margaret Hale. I hesitated for a second before answering. She was my grandmother. The man studied my face with mild surprise. Didn't think anyone from that family would come back here, he said quietly, then pointed out the window. Road runs about 5 miles into the forest before the pavement ends. Property's at the very end. The walk took nearly 2 hours. The paved road eventually turned to gravel and then to a narrow dirt path surrounded by tall pine trees that blocked most of the sunlight. By the time I reached the end of the road, a light rain had started falling, soaking the ground and making the forest eerily quiet. The property looked exactly like the lawyer described, wild, overgrown, and completely empty. There was no mine entrance, no buildings, nothing but tangled bushes and moss-covered rocks beneath a steep ridge rising behind the land. For a moment, I stood there staring at the map, wondering if I had just spent my last money chasing a pointless clue. I almost turned around and started walking back toward town. But then I remembered the line written on the map. The entrance is on the eastern face. The ridge wasn't easy to climb. Loose rocks shifted under my boots, and the rain made the moss slippery. I spent nearly an hour moving along the base of the slope, searching the rock wall with my flashlight and pushing aside branches and dirt with my hands. Just when I was about to give up, my foot slipped on a patch of loose soil and a small slide of mud and stones rolled down the hillside. Beneath the dirt that fell away, something square appeared that definitely didn't belong there. Concrete. My heart started pounding as I dropped to my knees and began digging through the mud with my hands. Slowly a rectangular slab appeared, and in the center of it was a fixed steel door almost completely hidden by moss and dirt. There was no handle, only a single keyhole. I stared at it for a long moment while the rain fell around me. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out the rusted iron key. My hands shook slightly as I pushed it into the lock. At first it refused to turn, grinding loudly as if it hadn't moved in years. But when I forced it harder, the mechanism suddenly gave way with a deep metallic clunk that echoed through the silent forest. Slowly the heavy door creaked open just enough for a cold breath of stale air to escape from the darkness inside. I lifted my flashlight and pointed it through the opening. Instead of a mine tunnel, the beam revealed a narrow set of concrete stairs leading down into complete blackness beneath the mountain. Whatever my grandmother had left me out here, it wasn't just an abandoned mine. It was something hidden far below the ground, and I had just unlocked the only way inside. When I finally stepped down the concrete stairs and into the darkness beneath the mountain, I expected to find an old mine tunnel or maybe nothing at all, but what my flashlight revealed instead changed the entire story of my past. The narrow stairway ended in a small underground room built from thick concrete, more like a bunker than a mining shaft. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with sealed containers of water, old ration tins, tools, and survival supplies that looked like they had been waiting there for years. In one corner stood a simple cot with a folded blanket, and beside it sat a metal chest. The place felt silent and untouched, as if time itself had stopped the day it was sealed. My heart pounded as I opened the chest, half expecting it to be empty, but inside were neatly folded clothes, a framed photograph of my grandmother holding my hand when I was very young, and a bundle of letters tied together with string. Every envelope had my name written on it. The top one was marked first. I sat down on the edge of the cot and opened it carefully. The letter inside was several pages long, written in my grandmother's familiar handwriting. She explained that years ago she had discovered the truth about a powerful developer named Victor Sloan who had been forcing families to sell their land so he could build a massive luxury resort across the mountains. She had kept records of his illegal deals, threats, and bribes, and when he realized she had proof, he began watching our house and following us. According to her letter, the only way she could truly keep me safe was to make it look like she didn't care about me anymore. Leaving me with social services was the only way to make me disappear from Sloane's reach. At the bottom of the chest was a small lockbox, and inside it were stacks of cash and a thick ledger filled with the records she had kept. Days later, with the help of the same lawyer who gave me the key, those documents were handed over to investigators. Victor Sloane's entire operation collapsed once the truth came out, and the land he had spent years trying to steal remained exactly where it had always been, mine. Months later, I returned to the ridge and began clearing the overgrown property. The bunker beneath the mountain still sits there, quiet and hidden, but now I understand why my grandmother left it behind. She didn't abandon me the day she walked away from that government building years ago. She protected me the only way she could, even if it meant letting me believe she had stopped loving me. And standing on that land now, looking across the trees that stretch for miles in every direction, I finally understand something that took me most of my life to learn. Sometimes the people who seem to leave us are the ones who were protecting us all along.